Friday. Today is March 26th, and I hope everybody's having a good week. The last episode, we left off where we were just starting to get into the wet sanding. This episode's going to pick up from there with the wet sanding pretty much done. And I've already had a few people chiming in asking what sandpaper I'm using, and it's basically 3M, wet or dry. I did use it wet throughout the entire frame. And I started with an 800, and I sanded the entire frame with 800 to get it dull. And then anytime I wanted an area to look like it was just starting to wear through on the primer, I continued with the 800, and that's what would pull the gray through. And then throughout the frame where I wanted it to really bite and pull the colors through, I was using a 400 or 320. That's pretty much it. So the segment's going to start with showing the paint, pretty much finished, and then it's going to jump right into the build process. Let's go ahead and get things started and see what's happening with Peak Cycles. And so we're about ready to build a bike. Have all the food groups represented here. And yesterday was St. Patrick's Day. You know, I've got a Guinness for 3 in the fridge. And I got a couple boring things I got to handle first. One is I'm wrapping the handlebars in leather. I'll tell you more about this company here in a bit. And I've got to clean the white walls. The wheels are pretty much the only shiny thing on the entire build. So let's go ahead and take care of that, and we'll get to building. Okay, after diving into it, obviously it's much easier to apply this handlebar tape with the handlebars mounted on the bike. So we're going to move on to building, clean up the white walls after the bike is built. As far as the handlebar tape, it's made by Good Horse, Ribbon Source, and it is leather. And that's why I went with it. I didn't go with Brooks because this is non-perforated. I wanted the old school look, and that's why I went with it. Let's go ahead and start building. Really hate to burn through this, but we're running out of time. So here it goes. I'm gonna start at the front of the frame, which is what I prefer. Work my way back. I'm gonna put the bearing cups in. This is literally called a bearing cup press made by Park Tool. They can get a little pricey, but if you like to build bikes, highly recommended. Sure beats a hammer and a 2x4. So go ahead and get the bearings in, install the fork, and keep it going. I'm going to jump in here real quick and talk about these nylon wedges. They can be purchased at Lowe's or Home Depot. I use them to open up the fork tubes so you're not having to scratch your fork tubes, sliding them through. Granted, this is a rat rod. I'm not worried about scratches. However, I prefer not to have zigzag scratches all the way up the fork tube. So take a flathead on the underside so you don't show scratches. Shove those wedges in there and your fork tube will slide in no problem. I did a whole episode on this. Check back on the Peak Cycles YouTube archives. Moving forward, triple tree is installed. Nothing's tightened down yet. And I did fail to mention that even though I like to start at the front of the bike to mount your rear wheel on, this will help balance out the bike. These stands were not designed for these big heavy cruisers, and the front end does like to dip, especially with Springer forks or triple trees. So put that back wheel on, and look, Mom, no hams. Oh man, I may just sleep out in the shop tonight. Those first looks when it just starts to come together, those are the best, isn't it? Heart starts racing. Triple tree is in. Truss rods, everything's squared up. Plenty of tire clearance. All just hand tight so we can make minor adjustments when we get it on the ground. Meanwhile, let's go ahead and move on to the cranks and bottom bracket. Bottom bracket and cranks are in, and obviously the chain ring. I'm going to roll it raw, and believe it or not, this is protected. I'll tell you about that right now. When I first received that chain ring back from John, I wanted to keep it in its raw state. I liked it so much, I wanted to keep it in its raw state form for the final build. And there are several different processes of doing that. You know, if you leave something raw steel, it's going to rust. Clear coats, hit and miss. I personally don't like how most raw steel, whether it's copper or whatever it may be, when it's clear coated, you can tell. It doesn't have that pop. So I reached out to John, who cut it for me, and of course John comes through again. John, you need to start your own YouTube channel. And I asked him, I said, what do you recommend for protecting the steel? And he recommended what's called Sharkhide. And I'm going to read this label to you. Good for aluminum, copper, brass, bronze, steel, stainless, and more. Sharkhide will never, ever, says never, ever, peel, chip, flake, or yellow. That's incredible. Now, rewind this video right now. Look at that chain ring again. The best part about it is it looks natural. It doesn't even look like there's a clear coat on it. Process, super simple. You basically, just like spray painting, but you go back and forth in straight lines starting at 12 inches. Before that coat dries, you do it again immediately after from 8 inches away. 15 minutes, it's dry. Incredible. Did the other side. Sharkhide. Let's keep it going. Shifter's in. And I made a point of positioning it right behind the saddle there. Also installed it prior to installing the rear wheel because the screws can't be reached once the wheel is on. Another reason for it is we want to make sure we're getting proper tension on the cable so we'll be able to slide the wheel back. Let's go ahead and get that figured out and then we'll build the chain. And so now we have good tension here. So I still haven't tightened anything down. The wheel is not tightened down. The shifter is not tightened down. And that's because we're going to build a chain and make sure that we have a nice tight chain at the same time the shifter cable is nice and tight. Oh, so close. But it's late. Basically all that needs to be done right now is calibrating the shifter with the chain tension. And what I mean by that is getting the wheel position so that the cable going from the shifter to the axle is correct with tension on the chain. So either the shifter needs to move back or we need to remove a link from the chain. It's late, calling it a night. Other than that, wrap the bars tomorrow, add the tank plates back in, and she'll be ready to roll. Meanwhile, good night. Long night, and I really wanted to get it done, but I had to go to bed with a clear head and figure out what was happening. Basically, I couldn't figure out why, even though I'd mocked up the frame and the bike with the shifter and the chain and ran it through the gears, why it wasn't working with the final build here. For whatever reason, I didn't move the shifter, but the cable wasn't reaching. I knew I had enough leeway with the tensioner to lengthen or shorten it, but it wasn't reaching at all. So, went to bed next morning, got up, and bingo, figured it out. Let's keep it going. Okay, it's now the next morning, and we're gonna pick up on getting the cable tension for the shifter in line with the chain tension. Okay, finally in there. Perfect tension on the cable, perfect tension on the chain, and I figured out what happened. When I mocked this up, I used the Schwinn oversized chain ring, which is a 65T. In order to create a skip tooth, we needed an even number of teeth. So we went with 64 and made this a 32. That one tooth difference was the difference of the placement of the shifter and why the cable wasn't working out. We're good to go now. Okay, we're about ready to drop this on the ground. Well, not drop it, but put it on the ground. Gonna wrap the bars and put the tank plates back in. Well, she is officially done. Woohoo! Cable and chain line all dialed in. Handlebars wrapped. I'll go over that with you in just a moment. Meanwhile, should we give it a 360 on the ground look? Wrapping handlebars seems pretty simple, right? Gonna go over a few things about wrapping handlebars. If you're gonna wrap your handlebars, is you should always start from the end versus the top. The reason why is because if you go from the top down, this lip would be on the other side. And what happens is as you're riding, you'll be pulling on those edges and they'll start pulling up. Secondly, always wrap in the direction that the spiral is tightening. If you wrap it the wrong direction, you're pulling, you'll be loosening that spiral. And lastly, there is an adhesive strip under this tape in the center, and that pretty much gives you your mark of where to advance, because you always want that tape to hit the handlebar. You don't want the tape to go leather over leather. Pretty much it. On the kickstand. If you know me, I'm a kickstand guy. I'm not a guy who wants to lean his bike up against a tree or prop it against a curb. I use kickstand. So throughout the process of building this bike, because it's old meets new, I was puzzled on a kickstand. I didn't want to use anything modern. I didn't want to use billet. And so even when I debuted the bike, I used a bike stand. Over the past few days, I was thinking, I had this idea. I didn't come up with the concept. I've seen people use box wrenches or pry bars or lug wrenches, for that matter, to prop up their bike using the rear axle. Again, I didn't invent the concept. However, none of those wrenches will work with my frame design because my dropouts are too recessed from the stays and the wrench hits before it reaches the axle. So I came up with this. Socket now reaches the axle. I did measure the axle from the ground down to find out what size drive I need, and I went to the hardware store and purchased this. I did spot weld this, so yes, this one is done. This is a full-time kickstand. However, now I will always have a 15mm with me in case anybody gets a flat. Let's go ahead and take a look. So there you go. Ratchet and rods pretty much go hand in hand. As I demonstrated, the socket is removable. I'll put it in my pocket, slide the drive into the fork tube. Fork tubes were already open to give it more of that ratty look, so just totally worked out. What we're going to do now is give it a 360 look on the ground, as we do every time we finish a first time mock-up. So let's go ahead and take a look. Tell you that bike is as fun as it looks. I initially did that build to enter a HotRod build off on social media, Facebook page simply called HotRod Bicycles. Fun group, should check it out. And I won the build off. Very grateful. I not only won the build off, but I won in so many other ways of learning, breaking me out of my shell of doing the normal shiny stretch. And that's the fun thing about these build offs, is they push you to a level you didn't even know you had. As you saw over the last couple episodes, I learned a lot. And hopefully, you picked up on a thing or two. That's pretty much gonna wrap it up. Hope you enjoyed today's version of What's Happening at Peak Cycles. And until next time, make it a killer day! So there you go. Ratchet and rods pretty much go hand in hand. Try that again. Oh, shit. So there you go. Ratchets and rods pretty much go hand in hand. Damn it, this thing's giving me a hard time today.